All right. So I'm not going to wait for everyone to arrive before I start talking. I'm just going to share a little bit about what what I was talking about yesterday. Now, the important thing from yesterday to remember is Rob Hasselhoff is not like a puppet master or anything like that. And I don't think that he's leading the charge on anything going back as far as 2015 or whatever. The way I see him is that because he's more outspoken and because he's more, how should I put it? I think he follows what's happening in his circle and makes investments based on the intelligence that he gathers there. And I think that it's a case where you've got a very small little elite community in South Africa, and if you're part of that elite community, you're going to pick out on what's happening. And because Rob Hasselhoff is more outspoken than the rest, he allows you to see what they're saying. So you look at someone like Michiel Leroux. Now, Leroux has a very close relationship with the DA, donates enormous amounts to them. He even gave Helen Zille a place to stay for 3 months when she was done with her premiership. So, between premiership and finding a new place to stay. And so there's like this very close relationship, and she's personal friends with the Oppenheimers and so on. And so there's this like quite close relationship between the elites and the DA and the economic elites at the top, and a number of the elites in the ANC, like Motsepe and Ramaphosa and a number of other people, a couple of the old fellows like Trevor Manuel. And so you've got this sort of network of both political and economic elites, whether you're talking about the Rupert, Leroux, Becker, even in his recent book, Tony Leon talks very, very friendly about, Adrian Basson, even though Basson is, well, as far as I'm concerned, he's poison. And kind of against DA interest, but, they have to get on socially, and they have to, have a good relationship with the media, because Tony Leon still has an enormous amount of influence over the DA, probably more than he should, given his lack of official status. But that's a separate comment. I think what's interesting here is two concepts. So the two concepts here, and one of them applies to Rob Hasselhoff, but I think he's doing it accidentally. So what's going on here is you've got something called division. Something called division. You know what division means. It's pretty self-explanatory. The idea is that the ANC has got to be divided if you want to take them out of power, right? So you've got to split off the extremists from the mainstream, and you've got to pair the mainstream of the ANC with the minoritarian sort of captured position. And this is a dual containment strategy. So the dual containment strategy is you give the black radicals a little playground to romp around in, like the EFF or the MK, and you make sure that the minorities are contained in that they all think they have to vote for their DA or else they're going to die. And therefore, both of the ends of the sort of ethnic power continuum are controlled and neutralized. So minorities might push for secession, Zulus might push for secession, so on and so forth, right? Now the IFP is already entangled enough financially and diplomatically that they are not going to. They don't ever push for anything radical. They're not for Zulu independence. I think partially that's got to do with ties in the royal house, although that's a very, very dark black box that I can't look into. So that is raw speculation based on what positions they take politically, and I can't go beyond there unless I have an insider who can explain that to me. So that's sort of my next project, is understanding what happens in the Zulu system. At the moment, what's important to bear in mind is the concept of containment. Now, containment doesn't work if you have options. So you've got to give people the idea that they have only one option for expressing their political role, and that option is compromise and the lesser evil, and so on and so forth, right? And a good example of this, and if you follow British commentators on the right, you will notice that they're talking increasingly about Nigel Farage this way. And the deep establishment voices, one of the big ones is the editor of the Spectator, a man called Fraser Nelson. And recently he had to spell out to the left that they shouldn't be attacking Farage because they couldn't tell that he was containment. They were so deranged that they were attacking him in public. Now, Farage has actually publicly stated on several occasions that his entire purpose is to make sure that no one extreme comes into the system. So he believes in open borders. He doesn't, and he insists that he is going to curry favor with Muslims because they're going to be the majority one day. There's like this completely defeatist attitude towards this, and he makes sure that his party is stuffed with people who are very sort of wet establishment types and so on. Now, the DA is very much this. The DA has sold itself as a party that is occasionally capable of being edgy and right-wing and based. And you'll see Helen Zille does this from time to time with her comments. She likes to cause controversy. But so, for example, she's aware of this dynamic. So, for example, she invited Musi Maimane to attack her in public when they were running him as a candidate so that he would seem more authentic. He said, call me a racist, let people think that you're authentic, because the idea they had to try something new. But I'm going to get there. I have to go back a little bit further, and this is the document that I'm going to read to you guys now. So the DA is pretty left wing, and I'm going to read this to you because it's very important for you to see exactly where the DA is. So here we go. Yesterday I had a most enlightening lunch at the Good Governance Club. That was according to the Chatham House rules. Amazing to be invited. And he said, she says, someone who spent years in the Eastern Bloc, when he predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall, he said, none of the seminal moments in history are ever predictable. And she says, this is good because people keep predicting the demise of South Africa. So please keep on predicting it as much as you can, and then it will not happen. Now, I think this is her sort of big position, is it's not about any particular ideological she doesn't believe in any sort of constituency in South Africa as one. She wants the point is that South Africa as a concept must continue to exist. We must not allow it to fragment. It's her number one thing that she believes in. And I don't think it's got to do with the human cost. I think it's got to do with what it signifies at a global level. Now, I ran over that in the previous stream. Much later on in the stream, I don't know how late in the stream it was, but very later on, I pulled out 3 little clips from her, from different interviews, where she says that on the first one, she says, fewer and fewer places are 100. No place is 100% white anymore, and more places are 100% black, and that's a good thing. And I thought, okay, cool. So it's the demographic change, the process of transformation that defines the ideology of the ANC is something that she believes in and believes in is good. Then she says that every country in the world is and must and inevitably going to become plural, like South Africa, as she says. And this is going to mean that everyone has to copy what South Africa is doing. And all economic models will have to be basically the same. And then all sort of political models have to be identical. And no culture or ethnicity will ever be able to express itself politically again. Then I pulled up a clip from an old Renegade Report interview with Roman Kavanagh and Jonathan Witt, where she says that she's actually not an economic liberal. She believes that the government should directly control and manage the direction of economic development at all levels in perpetuity throughout the universe. So, to sum it up, her perspective is that we need to we need to use social and political engineering to erase ethnic boundaries. We have to, and we have to develop all the world according to a single central economic plan, where you don't have the ability to express yourself. Now, she believes in sort of freedom of expression, freedom to do drugs, freedom, like bodily autonomy. Do what you want with your little body. It doesn't matter. It's a fungible commodity. So, I mean, look, it doesn't matter what you say if you are one figure in a global harmonized system. There is no individual who is not already amongst the elite who can have any political influence, even a politician, if you have a globally harmonized system, right? And the ability to organize politically requires an ethnic base and a collective interest group. And she wants to have those erased. So she is actually a communist. In terms of her end goal, she is very much a communist, but she sees liberalism as a path to get there. So it's a very, very long-term vision. And it's very similar to Jan Smuts's vision in a funny sort of way. And I don't think Jan Smuts was a communist. I think and I don't think Helen Zille sees herself as a communist. It's more that the model that she describes inevitably means communism. And my perspective here is that you need to actually have ethnic division and ethnically based representation in order for any area of the globe to have any autonomy. And she says you don't, I mean, another bit of that interview with Roman Kavanagh and whatever, towards the end, they ask her about Cape Independence, and she says that, what does she say? She says, you don't need Cape Independence because we already have, you can already vote in the DA at the provincial level. That was her argument. Like, that's it. Like, we've already got a federal system. You can. This sort of shows that her idea of what actually constitutes political representation is extremely narrow. Extremely narrow. It's all about sort of different managerial teams. So you vote in the better managerial team, but you can't influence the policies, the direction, or the shape of anything. That's bad. You cannot be allowed to have any different picture of how to live life, how to have meaning in the world. You have to conform to the United Nations central plan for the world. Okay, this is the perspective that she has. She allows one country. I think she allows Israel to be a bit different. She does believe that Israel deserves to be itself and have an ethnically based government. I think she does believe that. But otherwise she's pretty strict on it. And I think the one thing that's very important here as well is just to sort of sketch that she's actually an incredibly intelligent and far-sighted woman and very effective. And I think that what she, I don't know. It's like the difficulty is that she's so incredible. She's so incredibly far-sighted that it's very hard to. It's almost unbelievable, actually, because I mean, this interview that I'm scrolling through over here from 2012 it's with Chatham House in 2012. So October 2012. Now you've got to remember this is 2 months after Marikana. Okay, it's 2 months after Marikana. Julius Malema has not left the party yet. He hasn't been kicked out. I mean, he started. But Marikana is a trigger for Julius Malema to start attacking Jacob Zuma for letting this happen. Because Julius Malema, from what I recall, he wanted the people responsible for this. I think he genuinely actually gave a shit. Because for everybody, there, no matter how venal or corrupt you are, there is something that will touch you. And for Julius Malema, I think it was Marikana. And he's compromised on a lot since then. But he's pretty firm on Marikana. And that's why he attacks Ramaphosa so relentlessly, and I think Ramaphosa likes to wind him up by saying he belongs in the ANC and he's just like us and everything. And I've always suspected there's some kind of inside joke going on there, because it's never said seriously. It's always sort of said as a bit of a jest. And I know we on our side of the aisle make a big deal out of, oh, that means that they're all of the same picture, and they kind of are up to a point. Okay, so I think even the most compromised members of the ANC, and compromised in the sense that a black nationalist would see it as compromised, even the most compromised of them actually does believe in the National Democratic Revolution. And Cyril Ramaphosa is very serious about it. But they're aware that there's always a tussle and a balance of forces. Now, because the economy stagnated around 2010, 2011, like just after the economic crash, South Africa didn't keep going down and it didn't go back up. It sort of stagnated. And the last time there was a public report by the JSE that showed the rate of racial ownership within the economy, the domestically owned proportion of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange was about 50%. It was slightly less than 50% white and slightly more than 50% non-white, right? And then you have the housing market after the 2011 census. The housing market, according to the Helen Sisman Foundation, they had an old page that I have struggled in vain to find again. But they had this old report where they sort of said, well, okay, actually, we've pretty much achieved parity in terms of value of household ownership. And then another character who I found who did a bit of better research, someone who has access to data resources I don't, came up with a figure for outright home ownership where, I think it's for 2017, where 35% of the white population own their homes outright and 57% of black population own their homes outright. So we're getting to this point where the balance of forces in the economy has shifted, but it's more or less a stalemate. And the people right at the top of the ladder, it's actually still skewed towards minorities. It's still white people, right, who are at the top. The higher up you go, the whiter it gets. And there's a hollowing out of the middle that's been happening. There's and I mean, you can look at any kind of analysis. Where did I put my coffee? There we go. I ran out of milk. I have to drink black coffee today. But where is I going with this? Oh yeah, so you got a balance of forces here. And this is around the time, so Marikana happens at a time when there's about a 50-50 balance. And it's Lonmin, they shoot the miners, the police shoot the miners, and the miners are striking because, see, now here's an interesting thing. If you read the analysis around this time, like the professional academic analysis, there's this one guy who compared it to the structure of political control in Oaxaca province in Mexico. And he calls it neopatrimonialism. I can't remember the guy's name. Durano Herman or something like that. He's got a double barrel name, like a half Mexican, half German surname. And he was describing a situation where you've got this little triangle where you've got the political party, the unions, and capital, the mines. And then there's a mediating factor, which is traditional communities. So the same thing happens with Marikana. So in Marikana, you've got this situation where, let's say the Bafokeng or whoever the case was, I can't remember who the precise group was that was around Marikana. There's a traditional leader who gets his people picked first, and you have preferential land access for whatever operations you want to do there. Then you have, and there's like a lot of legal gray areas that can happen in those areas, especially since the expansion of traditional authorities under Jacob Zuma. So they become this interesting little loophole for a lot of South African laws, which I think I need to actually spend proper time looking into, because I do know that that's a bit of a thing. But the other thing is that you've got the tripartite alliance, and the tripartite alliance, The Communist Party is sort of a neck without a head, the head being the Soviet Union. But you've got the right hand of the ANC and the left hand of the unions, and the unions and the ANC through used to be more consolidated within Chancellor House, but it's broadened out since those days. But you have this control of cadres in capital through BEE, and capital wants this. Capital wants this, and I'll explain that in a minute. They like BEE for a very specific reason. It's also a form of containment. So the idea, and this is why Brenthurst did the Brenthurst Initiative, because the idea of you bring them into the capital market and you make sure they're wealthy and invested, and then they won't take your money, So they won't confiscate capital because they're invested. And also they're entangled in mutual business interests, so they're not, you can sort of dampen the effect of their radicalism. That's the idea behind the Brenthurst Initiative, and that's why they pushed BEE. And they came with it first. Mbeki sort of tweaked it a bit and made it a bit firmer, and they've been upgrading it ever since. And in 2012, you also see the Oppenheimers now divest from the mining business. So, I mean, I can't remember if it was at the same time or if it was just before, but it was the same year. I must double check the timeline for that. But at any rate, what you have is a situation where you've got cadres who are in the mines, and then you've got Cyril Ramaphosa's old union, MUN, who is controlling, and they'll have like sole access to the union. And because you have a sort of thing of extension to non-parties, now in the Labour Relations Act, you've got two clauses, Section 23 and Section 32. Both of them are regard extension to non-parties. Section 23 regards within the same workplace. So if you've got a majority of the workers, then it's the same workplace. So this was challenged in court after Marikana, because the AMCU, which is the new Wildcat union that's outside of the ANC's control, they came up and they said, we have complete control over this mine shaft and that mine shaft, right? And so we should be considered a separate workplace. And the Constitutional Court told them to go screw themselves. And because MUN held the bulk of the factory of the labor for the rest of Lonmin's operations, therefore they were the official representatives of the workers. And the difficulty with this situation is that people are not being heard. Now, I'm not a big fan of unions, but I am sympathetic to how nasty it is to work at the bottom of the totem pole. Now, I had a very, very tiny taste of this when I was in 2011, and I worked as a farm worker. And if you're a young man, it's actually not bad. Like, it's fun, even if you're earning nothing, you're not supporting a family, whatever, you've got enough money for the occasional beer on the weekend, and you eat kind of millipap and, soy mince and rubbish like that, but you can get by and life's okay. You're 20, you can take a kick in the nads. But if you're 45 and you're a rock drill operator, and you've been a rock drill operator for like 15, 20 years, you're almost certainly going to be suffering from some kind of nerve damage or arthritis. So these people were looking forward to lives which are pretty miserable. And so they struck for higher pay and medical cover and things like this. And MUN told them no. They had to go with a wildcat strike because MUN wouldn't let them strike, because MUN is locked up with the ANC that has shared control in Lonmin through BEE. So you've got this little kind of wedge. And this is actually most of the economy now. Almost every sector of the economy has this kind of established neopatrimonial relationship. And not only that, but because of this, you can create a situation where, despite the fact that margins are lower overall, you can drive the costs up so that smaller companies cannot actually buffer themselves against this. Because if you're large enough, you can buffer yourself against wage rises and cost rises and tax increases and things like this. But if you're small, you can't. And so if you can dominate a sector, then you can actually shut out any kind of mid-market competition. And this is true of like the steel sector. It doesn't matter what you're talking about, right? So you've got this really horrible cartelized economy that doesn't allow new entrants into most sectors unless they strike a deal right at the center. So imagine like you've got like the Korean chaebol system, but everyone in the entire system is retarded and stealing. That's kind of what you've got to imagine. Like give everyone retard juice in 1958 in South Korea and see what happens. So in the middle of this, you've got this sort of deadlock, and Julius Malema is sort of thinking, but, you know, I believe in the revolution. He's younger than I am now when this happens, I think, by a couple of years. And he gets really hot under the collar, and he decides, no, screw you. You know, you've got to get rid of Cyril Ramaphosa. You got someone called the shots to use live rounds. Remember the live rounds that were used? That's not normal. Of course, it happened because UMCU actually killed police officers, right? They killed security guards and I think 1 or 2 police officers. I can't remember the details. It was years ago. But what happened was that they just, the cops don't take to this well, and they decided to have revenge. And someone high up authorized them to use live rounds instead of, you know, the normal plastic rounds. So they go in and they kill 17 people in the initial charge, and then they chase down the rest and put bullets in their heads at point blank range, right? So half of the people who died at Marikana were executed. But the initial order to use live rounds was given from high up, right? And I don't understand the rationale behind it. It could be anything. There's a number of different reasons that they could have, but it's sort of a detail of history. What is interesting is immediately afterwards, Helen Zille sees what Malema's rebellion means. Immediately afterwards. So, I'm sure the High Commissioner would not like me to say this, but I think over the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to see a complete realignment of politics in South Africa. Interestingly enough, the divisions that I think are clearly symbolized by Julius Malema on the one hand and the Democratic Alliance on the other is a dividing line that goes right through the middle of the ANC. Okay, I'm going to pause there before I read further, and I want to, I mean, you guys can read ahead, and you'll see where I'm going to go next and why that's important. But the important detail here is that you remember when in 2022 in the speech he gave in March in BizNews, and I remember that I mentioned that in my previous stream. She said that, so she drew this big triangle, and on the one end was the EFF, and the other one is the DA and the little parties that she doesn't care about and wishes were erased from the face of the planet, because she believes in single party control, just as long as it's hers. Hey, I'm no different. And then you've got this middle ground here, and that's the ANC, and that needs to split. So what she's drawing over here back in 2012 is the exact same picture. And she said in that talk that she realized it since 2014. But here she's clearly talking about it immediately in the wake of Marikana. So that is what realigns the system. And like what you may remember reading about this kind of stuff at the time and not picking up on it because everyone's talking about realignment and like everything's changed now. But it didn't feel like it, did it? So, I mean, Mandela's now, I think his last public appearance was this year as well. And he's dead by the following year. So it's just an interesting coincidence, right? Which I find really, truly fascinating. As the balance of forces hits this 50-50 stalemate, realignment and splitting of the ANC, right? But now, interestingly, she reveals another element of her worldview over here when she says the National Development Plan, which emanates from the President's office, from Minister Trevor Manuel, is an excellent plan, and the Democratic Alliance agrees with it, and it aligns with their plan of 8% jobs growth. Interesting. Interesting, right? So that was a complete failure, and it didn't do anything, but she says that's what we believe in. So you've got to understand that it's in one of those interviews that I mentioned last night. There's a later portion of the interview where she says that, how should she put it? How did she put it? Her party was founded in 1977 by Jannie Steytler. So she sees the DA as actually being the Progressive Party from the old days. Now, the Progressive Party was formed when the old UP split in two, into the Federal Republicans and the Progressive. No, it's not. I think it was just called the Republican Party. I can't remember correctly. And then the Progressives. Now, the Liberal Party is something that, muddies the waters. They were a separate movement that split off sooner, and they engaged in terrorism. And they were the party of, what's his name? Alan Paton. Now, Paton, of course, didn't back this kind of stuff, but I thought it was very, very interesting because I wasn't aware that there were white liberal terrorists, but there were. They later joined the ANC. Completely separate, sort of, but interesting little factoid. And so she sees herself as being from this from this sort of split of the UP, which is the United Party was formed from the merger, a merger between the South African Party, which was founded in 1896 by William Schreiner. Schreiner's descendants are still around and still politically active, believe it or not. And, they were, left-wing terrorists in the 1970s and 80s as well. But where was I going? Oh, yeah, sorry. So SAP, and then the Nationalist Party forms out of the remnants of the Afrikanerbond, which was founded in 1878 in reaction to the British attempt to annex the interior. They don't want that to happen. They don't want to be confederated. So the Cape Afrikaners stand up, form their own political party. They lose, and the Boer Republics lose in 1900 because of the Boer War, unified. The National Party gets split. So they merge with the South African Party after they were defeated in their reform attempts in the 1920s. So they wanted to seize the goldfields. And the Oppenheimer family and other people sort of basically threatened to nuke the entire industry if they tried to nationalize it. Or if they tried to control labor anymore. So they lost that fight, and you just had mass migration to white South Africa ever since that point. And eventually it overwhelms the state. It's over. So because you become dependent on it, and then you're going to have to ask your population to take a haircut to take a massive cut in living standards in order to return to an ethnically sustainable population. So this is the point that the West is at now as a whole, is they're having that 1922, 1924 conversation with capital, right? Do we get to exist as a country anymore? That's what Donald Trump is. Donald Trump is the 1924 government of South Africa, the union of the Labour Party and the Nationalist Party. But what happens is they get defeated and they get merged back into the South African Party, which is the British imperialist puppet government. And a little portion of them says, no, we're not going to do that. And they stay behind. And they form the reformed National Party, the Herstichte Nasionale Partij. And this drops the H. They drop the H and just become the NP. and then they win in 48 by a little margin, and the margin grows as they, But so Helen Zille is part of a political tradition that goes along this way, and the aims have been exactly the same since like the interwar period. It's an extension of the thinking that forms the United Nations and that forms the common economic policy for global domination that the United States embodies, right? So they've got this sort of broad pattern here going. And the symbolism of South Africa is very important because if you can make South Africa work, then everything works. The interesting observation, and I keep going back to it, is Nick Land. Now, everyone will know Nick Land as this sort of like insane, sort of like very, very crazy theorist, very exotic theorist, who used to be a Marxist, and then, he talked about a whole bunch of other things, and he became a neo-reactionary in some form. And his sort of perspective is different. He says that liberty cannot be sustained except by abolishing democracy. That's the sort of primary observation of the neo-reactionary movement, whether you're talking about Curtis Yarvin or anyone. And I take a bit of this into account. So I know this is all philosophical and it's kind of boring for you at the moment, but I'll get back to the sort of more juicy sort of tangible stuff soon. The general he made an incredible observation in 1989 in his book Fanged Noumena, where he says that, like literally on the first essay, on the first page, in the first paragraph, he says like South Africa is the world capitulated in miniature. The white metropole is like the colonial metropoles of Europe and the United States. And the Bantustans and so on are like the global hinterlands of whatever. And the point of apartheid is to try and keep a buffer between the site of production and the site of consumption, very sort of like Marxist language. I mean, this is some guy who, is drenched in Marxist theory, but then his position is to go, yeah, but let's not do communism. Let's just have like a Marxist analysis that leads to free market absolutism. That's Nick Land, it makes him very interesting in a number of ways. He has some other sort of exotic theories that I'm not going to bother discussing here. But the main thing, the really interesting thing, is this core sort of picture of South Africa as being something that represents the world and therefore is vital to demonstrate what everything else means. That's why Mandela is sort of this global saint that cannot be questioned. And you can sort of say, well, oh yes, he was a terrorist back in his day. And then everyone can go, yeah, but he was facing white supremacy. Of course he was going to do that. And even, I understand this perspective. Who wouldn't stand up to being humiliated as a people for so long? All right? It makes sense. You can only expect people to do this. Whatever your belief system, it's sort of, you have to accept that that's part of the game. Like, even if you're the most hardcore white supremacist, you can't be outraged that Nelson Mandela did what he did. No matter where you stand, you have to just sort of go, well, yeah, that was going to happen. And on the similarly, you sort of go, well, the people who've got to maintain order are going to put you down because that's also going to happen. That's the nature of the game. What's happening over here is that people like Helen Zille who have this sort of very big vision, and a lot of people in her orbit share this vision, and they're big elites now. You've got to remember that the Oppenheimers, I think it was Harry Oppenheimer who's doing in the 1980s. He was grooming Cyril Ramaphosa from the Union world. And then you have Sidney Frankel, who introduced the famous pedophile, sort of white-collar criminal millionaire, who introduces him to Rolf Mayer. And like the people who are doing a lot of the networking that produces the main elite that's sort of still present, they were all present back then. And the people who are in charge of the DP at its foundation are still in charge of the DP now. You'll still see Ryan Coetzee, who was a young man back then, You'll still see him around providing analysis, although Helen Zille, I believe, quietly asked him to stop advising because he gave bad advice. He's basically in charge of setting the negotiation strategy for the GNU, and we all know how that's turned out. But then every major project that he's done has somehow destroyed what he was trying to advise. So, I mean, he headed the 2015, the Lib Dem campaign. What was it? No, it wasn't for 2015. It was earlier. It was like, I can't remember the years of these elections, but he had the Lib Dems election campaign after the coalition government with David Cameron. He headed the Remain campaign against Brexit, and he headed it was branded as Project Fear by its opponents. And then he headed the what did he head? Oh yeah, a consulting group called Consulum, and he kind of, by all accounts, really kind of ran it into the ground before flogging it to someone else, and then he comes back to South Africa as GNU advisor. Now, you can also see that Michiel Leroux, who I mentioned earlier, he also shadows this crowd a lot, and there's this big report in 2019 from which he put his name on, with Tony Leon and Ryan Coetzee, where they reported on the failure of the Maimane project by basically pointing out that the DA had lost support from minorities for the first time. And I mean, I made a little graph out of the data that they provided in that report, which, it's like they've never gotten above like 5% support amongst the black population. And that hasn't changed in subsequent years, really. But what they did is they damaged their minority support. So this is why they brought in Steenhuisen. Steenhuisen doesn't have a spine, he doesn't have a brain, but he is a really nice guy, and everyone likes him. And he can be sort of pushed around a bit. And he's also white, which makes you go, oh, well, they're definitely not, sort of like progressives then. Because people are starting to react against this progressive stuff because they're starting to recognize that it's eroding everything. I mean, honestly, I think it's a bit too late to be crying about this in some ways, but better late than never. So what she outlines here is that she believes in the National Development Plan. She sees the ANC's way of doing business is actually correct. And her position on Julius Malema, she says, okay, it's real. And then with people like Malema who appeal to a populace that's still largely uneducated and largely on state subsistence, isn't there a risk Malema will be the new Mandela and he will be the one who appeals to the people? This is what the question from the interviewer. And he says, and of course she goes and lavishes praise on Mandela, blah, blah, blah. I think you're right to say that the contest for the future is between Mandela's values and Malema's populism. And I have no doubt that the moderate center constitutionalist platform is the Mandela legacy platform that we need to follow across the board. And many people in the ANC follow those ideas, and we should be together in one party to have these values succeed. Like, do you not see this? She honestly believes not that they should be like together. It's that they are one party, that they should permanently be one party. The new SAP, the new UP. We're going to do this again. So now I want to just sort of say this in Rob Hash, just to make you guys sort of not worry about Rob Hassel. The reason I sort of poked around him, and the reason you can use him as a bit of like for that red yarn sort of conspiracy stuff that I was doing yesterday, is because his investment strategy shadows the moves made by these groups. We don't know who yet, but we know somebody in the South African oligarchy was backing Malema, training him up and professionalizing him after 2015. So that little period up until then, he was this fat, bumbling, noisy, rowdy guy. And after then, he gained an incredibly sharp edge. And he became very polished and very serious and started growing. And he started getting a lot of money. He could do a lot of rallies. He could do all incredible stuff. It wasn't just coasting on the energies of the youth. They had muscle, economic muscle behind them. Rumors had it that it was Natie Kirsch behind him. Could have been anyone, really. But that meeting that Rob Hasselhoff and his father were part of, and it's been informed that one of the guys in the foreground there in the photographs was his father. Rob Hasselhoff protested. He commented in the YouTube video, and he said, under the YouTube video, he left his own comment. And you know what? I'm actually kind of inclined to believe him for a number of reasons when he says that he didn't do anything with Malema. They didn't give the money, like whatever. I understand. Point is, because he's an outspoken guy who likes the limelight, he offers you these tiny little glimpses into what's going on, because he likes following where the money's going, and he's an investor. He runs Invest Africa. He wants people to invest in Africa. Now, there's a lot of stuff he's doing in the rest of the continent, but for some reason, he founds this thing in like late 2013, you know? So this is when that big bust up happens, and you get the EFF founded. And the elite says, yes, now it's going to work. Now, in this interview, Helen Zille says, oh, because of the split created by Malema, by 2014, we're already going to be able to form a coalition with the ANC and form this one-party state that is around this particular vision. Like, she's thinking about this with Jacob Zuma in mind, remember? Right? Like, he's Jacob Zuma's president, and she's thinking 2014, that's the year we're going to make it happen. And so, well, she says this in the interview. I'm going to try and let me try and find this for you. 2014. Yeah, the 2014 needs to be the tipping point elections, and in 2019 we'll have a new government based on this insight. There we go. So that's the perspective that she sort of had. That was the level that she was operating. So her and the people who are saying these things, and I mean, she's extremely close to these people. They have this very, very concrete vision. It was a long-term strategy. It was decided into it. This is why I thought Robert Hasselhoff was the most important, because you watch what he says in public over time. Watch carefully. He vacillates. One day he's saying, yes, bullish on South Africa. Put your money in. Time to invest. It's only going up. And then the next day he's saying, pull it out. South Africa's dead. Nothing's happening. Get it into America. And he said this year. And he's like, you know, he's most of the way in, and he's talking about getting out, you know, like every so often. Oh, and he quits politics every couple of months. We go like, what's going on here? Well, he's fickle because he's not actually a political player. He's not actually a political player, right? He's a political commentator who, you know, I think he'd be serving his interest better if he remained a businessman and a socialite, because he clearly is very good at those. Because, look, 5 minutes talking to the guy and you can, or listening to him, you know, and he you know, you can figure out, look, the guy's actually very charming. But he's fickle. So what I was looking at when I went back there is I said, well, look, here's what he's doing. He's forming this investment company that wants to stick money in South Africa in 2013. You know, no one would do that then. That was, you know, and still, even as time goes on, there's not much hope. And then he moves back to South Africa in 2017. And he says, now is the time. I'm going to go directly and be part of this. And I'm saying, these are pivotal years. He comes back in he starts investing in 2013 when Malema gets forms his party, and he comes back in 2017 when Ramaphosa is elected leader of the ANC, because these are huge watermark moments for the permanent oligarchy's long-term strategy for steering South Africa into a direction which is favorable to them. And it's this tripartite neopatrimonial structure wherein they share power with the ruling party, and it's actually very, very similar to the it's very, very similar to like the way that fascist countries would organize their economies, with the exception that it's sort of like as if there are two parties. So it's sort of like a two-party. It's like a dual fascism, shall we say? So, like, you get the and ignore the sort of crazy ideological aspects of fascism. Just talking purely economically. Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, the way they structured their economies was that they had party members take control of sectors of the economy. So the economy is privatized, but it's owned by political elites. And what we have in South Africa is we have a tiny, tiny number, maybe like a dozen, 2 dozen meaningful big players in the economy. And then next to them, we have the ANC, who have parasitized and taken by coercion a huge chunk of this, about half of it. So there's a 50-50 match over here between a very tight-knit social and economic elite network and a party network. And so it's sort of this odd compromise synthesis. And it's not dialectical control. This isn't, by the way, Mr. Hidden Hand Chronicles. What I'm describing here, that's not dialectical control. What is dialectical is the things that they've been doing here with Julius Malema. Somebody in this sort of social cluster decided they need to fund and help Julius Malema. Now, it's very interesting. Now, I can't remember the lady's name, but Jordan Hill Lewis's PR lady is an EFF supporter. And if I'm not mistaken, she actually was one of the people who helped Julius Malema reach sort of professional status. So this is a very incestuous network up here at the top. And Jordan Hill Lewis is sort of being flagged by a lot of people as a potential leader of the DA. And I don't know how enthusiastic Helen Zille is about him today, but she was very enthusiastic about him in the past. And she tries to groom these people who can be this, that, and the other. But where was I? I had another thing that I failed to mention. Okay, so then we've got the Maimane experiment. So the Maimane experiment is, and you can remember in the interview, I played a little bit of it yesterday, if you were following yesterday, a little bit of the interview from Roman Kabernak and Jonathan Witt's old podcast, The Renegade Report. She answers this question about, the future of liberalism by talking about a black liberal party will be formed and it will, she believes that it'll happen. And this is part of the picture. Now, this idea of split the ANC and consolidate the minorities. Now, she outlined the strategy completely, or almost completely, in the leaked audio that she had from 2019. So, I think it came out in 2021, actually. So there's leaked audio that was shared, and you can go find it online. It's not hard to find, where she talks about how she would rather form a coalition with Cyril Ramaphosa than with any other party. And you remember they had to run political cover for this during the lead up to the 2024 election, where we had this thing called the MPC, the Multi-Party Coalition, or the Moonshot Pact, right? And this was all parties to the right of the ANC were all in one big happy boat, whatever. And then they immediately stab Action South Africa in the back and all of the others in the back, and they say, balls to this. And the thing is, Hamid Mashaba and Musi Maimane and Songeza Zibi and all of these characters, what was the other one? Change Starts Now with that other moron. That party that went nowhere and actually didn't even register for the national elections. That cost 15 million rands of Michiel Leroux's money, that project. And the reason they're investing in all of these organizations, all of them backfire because they actually, they don't really capture anything significant. They actually eroded the DA's potential support a bit. And these were attempts to water down the ANC's vote, right? And capture middle-class black South Africans who wouldn't vote for the DA because the DA is racist or whatever. Now, the DA is not racist. They're actually left-wing. they are exactly where Cyril Ramaphosa is on, like 85, 90% of all things. Except it's that last little edge where he goes, okay, now let's just redistribute all the property. And they go like, ooh, geez, let's not do that. But they're not going to be able to stop him. He has this absolute depth charge, which is the land courts bill. And once he signs that and promulgates it and puts it into implementation, he's going to have, and I've explained this elsewhere, go look up land courts bill on the Cape Independent or on my blog, Marabani at substack.com. Look up that, and you look up the land courts bill, and I'll have an article on that explains exactly how it works. But basically, it'll lead to runaway land claims that anyone can make on behalf of anyone else for any reason. There are no real checks and balances. The court process will be completely rigged, kangaroo court style shit. And basically, no one in the political sector will have any control over this. And the land courts will probably become the most prominent and powerful arm of the government. And then you're just going to see the whole state get cannibalized overnight. It'll be total chaos. So this process, he could put that into play at any minute. It's like a real massive fucking depth charge, especially considered in context of all the other laws that are in place in his recent reforms. So, yeah, this is a very, very, very difficult thing. So, getting out of this means thinking in a very specific way, and this is where I get back to containment. So we understand what the splitting and containment is of the ANC's radicals. You have the MK was something they couldn't control. It was a blessing in disguise. Right? This is what I believe. I don't think anyone paid Jacobs. I don't think anyone paid Jacobs to do it. I don't think anyone could. I think he's really out of control, and he's properly a groot man on campus, But it's a blessing in disguise. What happens when MK goes is that all of those activists and politicians and patronage networks have to go somewhere. They really do. And they're going to go back into the DA, maybe into the ANC, maybe they go into the IFP. Who knows? There's a strong chance that, threatened with the dissolution of their revolutionary project, the ANC, the broader ANC, including all of the parties that split off of them, will put their differences aside and say, actually, guys, we need to survive, or we're going to have to hand over control. Do you really think they're going to let the DA carry the whip hand in a coalition government? Do you really think that's going to happen? You have a DA president of South Africa. Now, I'm not saying there won't be a portion of the population who'd welcome that. Even a little portion of the black population who'd welcome that, right? What I'm suggesting is that black elites can't tolerate this because they understand quite well that once you've done this, you've handed control of your economy back to the old white elite. They understand this. And these white elite, they're globalists, they're liberals, actually. So they're not sort of racist, white supremacist, whatever. No. They have a global outlook, and they're liberals, which means that they really, really resent the minorities who they have to rely on in order to get a wedge into political power. And you can see this in the DA there. I mean, every chance they have, unless you place them under a microscope, they keep trying to push transgenderism. They keep trying to push, a lot of, gay pride stuff on people. Nobody in their support base likes this. The Muslims don't like it. Conservative Christians don't like it. Black, white, brown, doesn't matter. Most people really don't like this stuff. They also keep trying to redistribute their support base as property to land invaders in enormous wadges. They're extremely proud of it. Helen Zille, in one of those interviews, actually boasts that they're the first people to do it, right? She agrees. She says that they're the first people to do it. We are the first people to give money to illegal land invaders, to informal settlements, whatever, free electricity and water connections and all of that. So this is the picture you've got to have in your mind, is that the DA are actually the ANC, but more serious. They're much, much more serious. And they really, really believe in this particular model of redistributive and integrative maneuvers. And I'm going to end this on this note. And I think it's an important one, which is that Rob Hasselt is in a position, and the people working for his media company are in a very crucial and important position. And I really hope someone shares this with them, because I might share it with one or two of them myself. They're in a crucial position because News 24 is going down. We all know this. They're doing badly. Everyone's starting to recognize what they mean. And I don't think Rob Hasselt believes the same things as the other people do. So him and his father, as I mentioned, the other thing, were his father, at least, was a member of something called the Pinay Circle. Now, the Pinay Circle, Anton Rupert was part of it, but I think Johan Rupert is a very different kettle of fish. It's a new generation, all in on the globalist stuff, very boomer mentality, whatever. The Pinay Circle were reactionaries. They were back in the day, they were an attempt by the old deposed Habsburg dynasties, their attempt to try and regain some political control. A lot of them supported the old apartheid system and so on. And my sort of feeling when I looked at this is I thought, well, like Hacksoff, Pinay Group, right? Surely these guys will have some sort of spirit of adventure, and they'd think, well, yes, we can do something monumental. And I had the same thought I had with, Jacob Zuma. You had the ability in 2021, Mr. Zuma, to be the father of a new nation, to have your face in the history books as the father of the Zulu nation as an independent country. But instead, he chose to just negotiate for being let out of jail early. It's lame. It's lame. It's short-sighted. Pathetic. And what I'm sort of saying here is that, look, people like Rob Hasselt, who have one foot in and one foot out, there's a bit of the black sheep about him. There's a bit of the sort of like rebel. He likes to have fun. He likes to vibe. He likes being a socialite. I get this. What I'm saying is he's close enough to power to know what's going on, but he's also in a position where he can play a defining role in which direction this goes. If he continues pushing in the direction he is doing now, the narratives that are being formed by him and the people in his party they're all right. I think Joe Emilio actually goes the closest up to the line, because Joe Emilio does support Cape independence, but he doesn't harp on about it. And I remember that Rob Hasselt was he didn't want me in the group because I was like, all South Africa is done. You can't convince people, and we should partition it and everything because the end is nigh. Still my position. Partitionist. Sue me. Because I'm not going to take money to change my opinion. It's not who I am, really. If I have something that I think is really, really important, I don't want to not be able to say it. So where was I going with this? Oh yeah. If he starts to take the position of saying, well, actually, is South Africa really a viable country? And he sort of, well, as a media company and as a person, and he says, well, surely there's another model here. Surely there's a different way of doing, forming this country. Surely, and the reason I say this is that everything that I've said so far, South Africa has this meaning. And, everyone who supported Donald Trump is like, well, nations mean something, and we don't like being controlled and so on and so forth. But what is the future if you cannot demonstrate that there's an alternative to central global, post-national control? And the only way you can do that is by taking the primary vehicle by which they demonstrate the success of their vision and breaking it. Oh, beg your pardon. Because, it doesn't work when you have a Zimbabwe. right? Zimbabwe can fail, and it's like, oh, well, it just went south. Something bad happened. You have to produce a counterexample. And that means either the Zulus or the Afrikaners or the Cape have to demonstrate that they can make it work within it. Now, if Rob Hasshoff says that any country, any part of the country that wants to get out of this union should do it, if he stands up and says this and starts pushing that, it is going to cause an almighty stink. People are going to go after him from every direction. I don't know if he's ready for that. I really hope he is. If he takes this position, that's different. He makes the leap that someone like Jacob Zuma never could. He says, I'm not just flirting with controversy. I'm not just fishing on the banks of the river. I'm willing to cross the Rubicon. Because if you decide to do that, if you decide to take that position, and this is where I get irritated with the Fridays from Plus, because they nominally support the position, but they're not taking concrete actions towards it. They haven't tried. Because here's the thing: if you want to go through secession, much like anything else in life, where you know, in the political world, in corporate world, whatever, you build legitimacy by exhausting legitimate options. So they haven't tried to pass laws or anything like that that will give them give the Afrikaner people actual autonomy. They haven't done that. I mean, the guys who are supporting the Afrikaner Accord, as unrealistic as it is to demand that kind of Volksstaat without first building it, as unrealistic as all that is, those guys have an incredible point, which is that the Fridays from Plus hasn't tried. You have to exhaust all of those legitimate options, and then you can say, listen, you've given us no option. Now we have to press these buttons. And you have to decide that you're going to go down that road. And Nelson Mandela, this is the one thing that he had sort of in his a very, very high compliment towards him, is that he understood this gradualist approach, this sort of incremental approach, which is you start by saying, listen, please talk to us. We want this thing, and it's non-negotiable, but we want to do it as gently and as legitimately and as peacefully as possible. Will you let us do it? And then the other side says no. And then then you increase the stakes. And then the other side says no. And you say, okay, let's go up. The other side says no. Okay, let's go here. And at the point he was arrested, he says, well, look, we've gone up to the point where we do violent sabotage. The next steps are terrorism and guerrilla warfare. Are you ready for that? And he makes a nice, beautiful, like something that, you know, scholars of this refuse to settle on for a bunch of stupid ideological reasons. Distinctions between like these sort of stages. Because the ANC is not ready to capitulate to this new system that the DA want to see. And it's a system in which you have a permanent oligarchy that presides over a cartelized economy, and then uses sort of graduated welfare and targeted central planning through public-private partnerships in order to control the direction of the economy. That's the DA's vision. And the reason they keep going on about public-private partnerships is it's a way of cutting in economic elites into the government system without doing what they would call corruption. So corruption for them is when you break the procedural rules. It's not when you in spirit are acting corruptly, it's when you broke the procedural rules. So you can't let newcomers smash through the drywall because the door's locked. You make sure that the walls are concrete so that only people with the keys can come in. This is a big problem for me. I don't like it, because what it is it's producing an economy that is just locked in for the same people, and they just gradually erode your rights. They don't have a problem with BE. They don't have a problem with employment equity. They don't have a problem with sort of the race stuff, right? Helen Zille decided at a certain point, well, it's gone too far. You're stimulating a reaction, whatever. The moment at which she decided that woke had gone too far was towards the end of Donald Trump's term. And then she goes, okay, yeah, I see the woke stuff is driving people over to the right. So let's write this book now and say it's bad. and say, guys, get off the horse. It's getting in the way of the vision. Back in 2012, she doesn't care about any of this kind of stuff. She's saying, yeah, we're non-racialist, blah, blah, blah. People don't want this kind of stuff. But no, she really, really likes redistribution and all kinds of stuff like that. And she doesn't mind that it's, gradually racially homogenizing every parts of the country. This is good. And I mean, here's an interesting thing. Here's just to finish off. It says, when we look at the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative in the UK, Rio Tinto, other countries need to work very quickly because they still have the expertise that China does not have to establish those values and get signatures to documents now. Because China's not going to ask a lot of questions. And then we'll facilitate the big man crony system as if there was nothing else. Now, that's an interesting comment because, of how her party works, with Johan Rupert getting the electrical wheeling contract, for the Cape, and then they line up all of the policies so that they suit the system that he's about to design, so that he has he can just skim money off the top. Whether it's legal or illegal, it's certainly unethical in my view to rig something like that, to put something together like that. And then in my municipality in Drakenstein, you have this waste to energy plant that they're building, and they started redesigning the waste management regulations locally to make it almost impossible for people to push garbage out of the municipality to places where they would process it and compact it, and they didn't build new landfill sites. They wanted to essentially line up the system so that it would belt feed enough fuel into this thing, because it's going to be the largest waste to energy plant in the country. And we, the community down here opposed it in every conceivable way. They pointed out that the environmental impact assessment was bollocks, despite the fact that it cost 20 million rand to put together. We demonstrated that it was going to be unhealthy, bad, expensive, unaffordable. And then the very day that they decided that they weren't going to, that they promised the local public they weren't going to do it anymore, that very day they sent an email to Barbara Creasy asking for a grant to get it done. And the ticket price of this project is 200 million rand, but what they're charging the public taxpayers 1.2 billion. So it's a six-fold increase. This is the DA. This is how they do business. Their accounting is brilliant. They're very, very clean and tight and formal, but they aren't actually cleaner and more open than anyone else. It's just that they allow access for a very specific group of people, right? International sort of players from wherever can sort of dig in. And then you also have the ability to shut people out based on not being able to play by these rules. And I mean, they're good rules. A lot of them are good rules. So like, it's a similar thing to how America and the Western world in general works, is you have things like the Magnitsky Act and what have you. But the idea that Europe and America play by hard and fast rules is something that, when you see there are funny little cracks where you see absurd things. Like there was, for years, European Union was rewilding and increasing the wolf population. Right? This is an enormously big sort of ticket item. Everybody loves this, right? Like whether you're a right-wing conservationist or like a left-wing environmentalist, this whole kind of rewilding thing is really big and it's very successful. Everybody loves wild animals and the wolves and stuff. Then one day, Ursula von der Leyen is out racing with her horses, and the horse gets attacked by wolves, and she decides, okay, the wolves are going to be culled. And overnight, without her having any direct access to any of the policy-making instruments that would allow this to happen, it happens. They just cull the wolves. And I sort of, you sort of think to yourself, okay, well, we have a division of power and authority and all of this kind of stuff. And you say, well, look, the reality is that once you've got the machine working smoothly, it doesn't appear to do anything much day to day. But when an elite wants something to happen, it happens. It stays stable and static when it is comfortable for them, and then something changes when they don't like an outcome or a position or something. So look, the DA are will look very much above board, but they fail to pass the sniff test on a lot of things. I mean, look, here's the thing. They're better than the ANC. The ANC will just rampantly destroy and cannibalize everything. The DA do actually build stuff, but they're liquidating your wealth. And the model they have for Cape Town is a good example. International investors get to buy a property. They're the majority owners in like a lot of the top neighborhoods. Property prices are through the roof. Young people in the middle class can't live in Cape Town anymore, right? Some of them still do, but it's getting harder and harder. You have to live in a shoebox and pay through your nose. But land invaders get massive amounts of, they can have whatever they want, and they get title deeds and water and electricity. The ANC don't care about this as much as the DA do. And the DA could simply benchmark this thing by the ANC's performance and then soft pedal it. It wouldn't cost them anything. These people don't vote for them because they've gotten free stuff. They don't. So what you end up doing is you ratchet up the rates and the rates and the rates because these people are indigent. They don't pay you for anything, right? So the wheeling system brought in by Jan Rupert is an attempt to try and stop this bleeding, right? Because people are just jacking, they're just getting an Izinyoka to jack the system, right? And so they're saying, well, we've got to get everyone to go and pay as you go. And it's not like that people can't jippo these things, but they're going to try their best. And the idea is that you can, by making the electrical market sort of more or less free market-ish, you can drive the prices down. But that's not going to work because you're going to need to pay for this constant redistribution, and your tax base is evaporating. So you're chasing ghosts here, and you can ease the pressure just a little bit, but it's not going to actually change the equation very substantially, right? Because you're also charging people money for putting solar panels on their roofs. You're making them jump through legal loopholes. Then there's the desalination problem. Like, they don't want to upgrade the sewer system at scale because there are certain things that are not lucrative, like, certain kinds of water treatment systems, not very lucrative. And they can't clean up the townships that are polluting into the rivers either. So they hand wave the problem away. And it got so bad that they actually lost a desalination contract because the water quality in the bay at V&A Waterfront was so bad that the desal plant couldn't handle it, and they had to shut down, cancel the project. This is in 2019. So you can understand that you're going to hollow out the system. And to think about how stupid they are, look at what Jordan Hill-Lewis has done. On the one hand, an extremely bright policy that they've had for a number of years called the city improvement districts. Now, that's a corrupt sort of way of doing self-governance. So instead of doing what the Vryheids van Pliss's initiative, which is the CUP, where you allow neighborhoods to take control of their own sort of maintenance if they want, right? They're saying, no, you can sign up to having a corporation that's pre-approved by us to do that. And that allows them to do little, like, security patrols and things like this. So they have one for the CBD. Permanent residents, 60% of the permanent residents have to sign up to this. And in the CBD, that's 60% of 3,500 people, because it's mostly offices. Their plan is to shove 50,000 people, indigents, into high-rise apartment blocks in the CBD, like the structure of Johannesburg, 20 odd years ago. So they're going to shove all of these people into the CBD. The CID is going to fail because if the second they have to renew the contract, they've got to get contributions from these people. So the CID, which is keeping this place safe and clean, is going to collapse. Quality of life, quality of business, going to collapse. And the number of indigents who are around in the area who are going to increase the amount of organized crime presence in the area, the amount of public drunkenness and all kinds of stuff like that, that's going to go up. And then you're going to just collapse from the center. And it's going to donut out. It's going to erase the entire city from the very middle. This is what they do. And the idea is that the entire country will be owned by this sort of top international layer, right? And then everything in the middle that could offer any kind of challenge will be liquidated. And they don't worry too much about the ANC gaining power if they can merge the parties properly. So they're hoping that the MK just bursts and disintegrates, and the EFF withers away because it can't maintain its competence without elite support. This is what they're hoping. This is why there's no money for Cape Independence, because the point is to contain these people like Cape Independence. Because if Cape Independence got money from somebody, right, then they'd eat into the DA's base and force them to be more, well, reasonable. They'd force them to treat the middle class with respect, right? And the Vryheidsfront Plus, in order to hang on to the few donors that they have, are not deviating from the central plan. Much like the ANC, they still have their ideological picture in mind, but in order to play ball and keep the system moving and keep their little party afloat, they are behaving themselves. They are staying with the GNU. You know? So I don't know if it's just because of the donors or if it's because of certain personalities up north who have considerable say in the party structure, who have certain kinds of personal characters that I don't like. Be that as it may, you've got this is the lock-in. There's the Vryheidsfront Plus and the DA. Function is containment. And the thing about Truth Report, and I'm going to go back to this, is that so long as they just keep criticizing the ANC, they are acting as containment, because then they give DA voters a based voice to affiliate with and keep their eyes off the DA and on the ANC. So they say, oh, we're just going to fuck up the ANC. And then they affiliate this sort of like, based voice with the ANC. But what they've got is it's just still return to Mandela. It's continually return to Mandela. Let's do Mandela again. Right? And the problem with that is this is exactly what everyone already wants. It's status quo. Nothing will change. Everything will stay shit. But it'll be great for people who are in the club. And what I want to say is that if that is how they're behaving, if you don't see a change, if you don't see someone saying a radical suggestion, then they are not your friend. They're your enemy. And this is the one thing. It's never return to Mandela. It's, do you believe South Africa is a nation? Because if you do, you're kind of just not fighting for the actual people in the country. Because whether you're whether you're an extreme black nationalist or whether you're a minority, your interest does not lie in South Africa being a united entity. The only people who consistently benefit from this are the upper middle classes and the top layer of investors. If South Africa splits, you'll still have rich people. You'll still have upper middle class. Even in the rump state of Azania, with its withering economy, those people will still exist, mostly employed by the state, probably. This is the thing. Rich and poor will always exist. But misery doesn't have to be inevitable everywhere. We can save some part of South Africa. And I mean, Aaron's a suggestion of cutting the country right down the middle, where the greater Cape goes away on its own route, and the east of the country, Azania, goes and does its own thing. This is great. I think Zululand can make it on their own as well. But this is something that if you don't back these things, you're running into the problem that the current state of affairs is not sustainable. And look, Moletsi Mbeki has actually got behind this. He's saying the things that I insist as well are true, which is that if you cannot get rid of at least 50% of the civil service, you are going to destroy the entire country. Because we're headed for a fiscal cliff, and if we default, then this is all going sideways. It's already looking really bad right now. Look, there are ways around it, and I think the United States is helping. And we're going to go into the DA's model of the future if the United States' pressure succeeds. And then gradually all of the national entities the national movements will lose the little momentum that they have, and South Africa will become this sort of grey blob that sort of just gently drifts along. And the cartel will sort of continue to have their way. And yeah, then you have this sort of sustainable development program that caps growth at a certain place and so on. I think that pretty much sort of sums it up. Is basically, Rob Airsoft, close enough, good to watch because he's mouthy and he's part of the elite, so he gives you an insight into what they're saying, thinking and saying and doing, and that Helen Zille's vision is indicative of the core of this class, and that's what they really want. And they like the ANC. They like you because they give them a popular grip. They give them a handle on the population. So you have this thing that could say, pro-black liberation, what have you. You get a grip on that by incorporating them into the elite economy to some degree, right? But you push the Fabian third way model. So this is something Helen Zille, she's Open Society Foundation, all of this kind of stuff. She believes in this wholeheartedly. She believes in this sort of like globalized zero value world, which follows a certain kind of Fabian model. She believes in it. That's what she believes in. Tony Blair, all 9 yards. I think, look, this is why else would she put Leon Schreiber and his nonsense in charge of Home Affairs? He does it. He's like competent, shows up on time, and does his paperwork. So he's more competent than anyone the ANC could field. But he gets, and he's fielding policies that are just Tony Blair, 100%. Digital IDs and everything. They don't want to control the flow of migrants. They just want to document them so that they control them economically once they arrive. Economic migration is good. But yeah, it's very, very sewn up. So, but that's so. To summarize, it's split the ANC, contain the black nationalists, contain the minorities. And then you can bring the bulk of the black population and the minority population together into one camp, and they can push sort of Blairite third way central governance stuff. The stuff that's destroying Western Europe, which is far wealthier than we are. That's the kind of stuff that they think, we can try that in this fragile, deeply divided society called South Africa, right? And that's not going to bloody work. That's not going to work. It is going to fall apart at some point. It is going to bankrupt you at some point. And it's going to, in the meantime, it's just going to erase and destroy and vandalize everything that you care about in your community and in your society and in your culture. So, yeah, it's not good. It's not good. It's a luxury belief even for the Western Europe. Over here, it's a gluttonous belief. So, I think, look, judging by Rob Hasselhoff, he seems like the kind of guy who might hypothetically be interested in entertaining this idea. Maybe it scares him. Maybe he finds it a bit scary to be quite that controversial, because, saying you're pro-Trump is one thing. Because, and you'll irritate sort of very lefty types. But if you say you're pro-partition of South Africa, now you're playing with fire. There's a reason why people like myself are on the fringe. There's a reason why we're not, that prominent. It's because it is actually a genuinely edgy perspective at the moment. It really shouldn't be. It's very sensible as far as I'm concerned. It's a very common sense thing to do. But with that said, I think I've done enough. So hopefully that clears things up.